हेलो दोस्तों, बिगनर्स पॉइंट में आपका स्वागत है। और अभी हम कर रहे हैं इकोनॉमिक्स। चैप्टर नंबर 5 तक पहुंच गए हैं। 4 इससे पहले कंप्लीट कर लिए हैं। अगर नहीं करें आपने तो फिर प्लेलिस्ट मैंने बना रखी है, वो आ जाकर आप एक बार देख सकते हैं। मार्केट इक्विलिब्रियम। This chapter will be built on the foundation laid down in chapters 2 and 4, where we studied the consumer and firm behavior when they are price takers. In chapter 2, we have seen that an individual's demand curve for a commodity tells us what quantity a consumer is willing to buy at different prices when he takes price as given. The market demand curve in turn tells us how much of commodity all the consumer taken together are willing to purchase at different prices when everyone takes price as has given. In chapter 4, we have seen that an individual firm's supply curve tell us the quantity of the commodity that a profit maximizing firm would wish to sell at different prices when it takes price has given, and the market supply curve tells us how much of the commodity all the firm taken together would wish to supply at different prices when each firm takes price has given. In this chapter, we combine both consumers and firms' behavior to study market equilibrium through demand-supply analysis and determine at what price equilibrium will be attained. We also examine the effects of demand and supply shifts on equilibrium. At the end of the chapter, we will look at some of the applications of demand-supply analysis. Equilibrium, excess demand and excess supply. A perfectly competitive market consists of buyers and sellers who are driven by their self-interested objectives. Recall from chapters 2 and 4 that objectives of the consumers are to maximize their respective preferences and that of the firms are to maximize their respective profits. Both the consumer and firm's objectives are compatible in the equilibrium. An equilibrium is defined as a situation where the plans of all consumers and firms in the market match and the market clears. In equilibrium, the aggregate quantity that all firms wish to sell equals the quantity that all the consumers in the market wish to buy. In other words, market supply equals market demand. The price at which equilibrium is reached is called equilibrium price, and the quantity bought and sold at this price is called equilibrium quantity. Therefore, P dash P dash is an equilibrium if QDP equals to QSP, where P dash denotes the equilibrium price and QDP and QSP denote the market demand and market supply of the commodity respectively at price P. If at a price market supply is greater than market demand, we say that there is an excess supply in the market at that price, and if market demand exceeds market supply at a price, it is said that excess demand exists in the market at that price. Therefore, equilibrium in the perfectly competitive market can be defined alternatively as zero excess demand, zero excess supply situation. Whenever market supply is not equal to market demand and hence the market is not in equilibrium, there will be a tendency for the price to change. In the next two sections, we will try to understand what drives this change. Out of equilibrium behavior. From the time of Adam Smith, 1723-1790, it has been maintained that in a perfectly competitive market, an invisible hand is at play which changes price whenever there is imbalance in the market. Our institution also tell us that this invisible hand should raise the price in case of excess demand and lower the prices in the case of excess supply. Throughout our analysis, we shall maintain that the invisible hand plays this very important role. Moreover, we shall take it that the invisible hand by following this process is able to reach the equilibrium. This assumption will taken to hold in all that we discussed in the text. Market equilibrium, fixed number of firms. Recall that in chapter 2 we have derived the market demand curve for price taking consumers. And for price taking firms, the market supply curve was derived in Chapter 4 under the assumption of a fixed number of firms. In this section, with the help of these two curves, we will look at how supply and demand forces work together to determine where the market will be in equilibrium when the number of firms is fixed. We will also study how the equilibrium price and quantity change due to shifts in demand and supply curves. Figure 5.1 illustrates equilibrium for a perfectly competitive market with a fixed number of firms. Here, SS denotes the market supply curve and DD denotes the market demand curve for a commodity. The market supply curve SS shows how much of the commodity firms would wish to supply at different prices, and the demand curve DD tells us how much of the commodity the consumers would be willing to purchase at different prices. Graphically, an equilibrium is a point where the market supply curve intersects the market demand curve, because this is where the market demand equal market supply. At any other point, either there is excess supply or there is excess demand. To see what happens when market demand does not equal market supply, let us look in figure 5.1 again. Figure 5.1. S is P2, P dash P1, Q dash Q1 dash Q2 dash Q star Q2 or Q1. इधर है quantity, इधर हो गया price. Market equilibrium with fixed number of firms. Equilibrium occurs at the intersection of market demand curve DD and market supply curve SS. क्या कर रही हैं, एक दूसरे को काट रही हैं, इंटरसेक्ट करती हैं, इंटरसेक्ट कर रही हैं एक दूसरे को. द इक्विलिब्रियम क्वांटिटी इज क्यू स्टार एंड द इक्विलिब्रियम प्राइस इज पी स्टार एट द प्राइस ग्रेटर देन पी स्टार. There will be excess supply and at a price below P star there will be excess demand. इससे ऊपर है तो फिर क्या है, सप्लाई बहुत ज़्यादा है, और अगर स्टार से नीचे है तो फिर क्या है, डिमांड बहुत ज़्यादा है. ठीक है, ये यहाँ पे बताया इन फिगर 5.1. इफ द prevailing price is P1, the market demand is Q1, whereas the market supply is Q1 dash. Therefore, there is excess demand in market equal to Q1 dash or Q1. Some consumers who are either unable to obtain the commodity at all or obtain in it insufficient quantity we will willing to pay more than P1. The market price would tend to increase, all other things remaining the same as price rises. Quantity demanded falls and quantity supplied increases. The market moves towards the point where the quantity that the firms want to sell is equal to the quantity that the consumers want to buy. This happens when price is P star. The supply decision of the firms only match with the demand decisions of the consumers. Similarly, if the prevailing price is P2, the market supply Q2 will exceed the market demand Q2 dash at that price, giving rise to excess supply equal to Q2 dash or Q2. Some firms will not be then able to sell quantity they want to sell, so they will lower their price. All other things remaining the same as price falls, quantity demanded rises, quantity supplied falls. At P star, the firms are able to sell their desired output since market demand equal market supply at that price. Therefore, P star is the equilibrium price and the corresponding quantity Q star is the equilibrium quantity. To understand the equilibrium price and quantity determination more clearly, let us explain it through an example. Example 5.1. Let us consider the example of a market consisting of identical farms producing same quality of wheat. Suppose the market demand curve and the market supply curve for wheat are given by QD 200 minus P for 0 is greater than P and greater than 0 is smaller than P or equal than P, or P is smaller than 2200 and equal than 200. P is greater than if QD equals to 0 for P is greater than 200. QS is 120 plus P for P is greater than 10 or equal than 10. QS equals to 0 for 0 is smaller than or equal than P. P is smaller than 10. Where QD and QS denote the demand for supply of wheat in kilogram respectively, and P denotes the price of wheat per kilogram in rupees. Since at equilibrium price market clears, we find the equilibrium price denoted by P by equating market demand and supply and solve P star. जब हम इसको पूरा सॉल्व कर लेंगे तो क्या आएगा, P star इक्वल्स टू 40 QD means demand multiply by P star equals to Q as supply into P star. 200 minus P star equals to 120 plus P star. 2P star is equal to 80, P star is equal to 40. Therefore, the equilibrium price of wheat is 40 per kg. The equilibrium quantity denoted by Q star is obtained by substituting the equilibrium price into either the demand or the supply curves equation, since in equilibrium quantity demanded and supplied are equal. QD equals to Q star is equal to 200 minus 40 is equal to 160. Alternatively, Qs equal to Q0 is equal to 120 plus 40 is equal to 160. Thus, the equilibrium quantity is 160 kg at a price less than P star. Say P1 is equal to 25. QD is equal to 200 minus 25 is equal to 175. Qs is equal to 120 plus 225 is equal to 145. Therefore, at P1 is equal to 25. QD is greater than QS, which implies that there is excess demand at this price. Algebraically, excess demand ED can be expressed as ED P equals to QD minus QS is equal to 80 minus 2P. Notice from the above expression that for any price less than P star is equal to 40, excess demand will be positive. Similarly, at a price greater than P star, say P2 is equal to 45, QD is equal to 200 minus 45 is equal to 155, QS is equal to 120 plus 45 is equal to 165. Therefore, there is excess supply at this price since QS is greater than QD. Algebraically, excess supply EC can be expressed as ASP equals to QS minus QD is equal to आंसर आ जाएगा 2P minus 80. Notice from the above expression that for any price greater than P star is equal to 40, excess supply will be positive. Therefore, at any price greater than P star, there will be excess supply, and at any price lower than P star, there will be excess demand. Wage determination in labor market. Here we will briefly discuss the theory of wage determination under a perfectly competitive market structure using the demand supply analysis. The basic difference between a labor market and a market for goods is with respect to the source of supply and demand. In the labor market, households are suppliers of labor and the demand for labor comes from firms, whereas in the market for goods, it is the opposite. Here, it is important to point out that by labor, we mean the hours of work provided by laborers and not the number of laborers. The wage rate is determined at the intersection of the demand and supply curves of labor, where the demand for and supply of labor balance. We shall now see what the demand and supply curves of labor look like. To examine the demand for labor by a single firm, we assume that the labor is the only variable factor of production and the labor market is perfectly competitive, which in turn implies that each firm takes wage rate as given. Also, the firm we are concerned with is perfectly competitive in nature and carries out production with the goal of profit maximization. We also assume that given the technology of the firm, the law of diminishing marginal product holds. The firm being a profit maximizer will always employ labor up to the point where the extra cost she incurs incurs for employing the last unit of labor is equal to the additional benefit she earns from that unit. The extra cost of hiring one more unit of labor is the wage rate W. The extra output produced by one more unit of labor is its marginal product MPL, and by selling each extra unit of output, the additional earning of the firm is the marginal revenue MR she gets from that unit. Therefore, for each extra unit of labor, she gets an additional benefit equal to marginal revenue times marginal product, which is called marginal revenue product of labor MRPL. Thus, while hiring labor, the firm employs labor up to the point where W is equal to MRPL. MRPL equals to MR into MPL. Since we are dealing with a perfectly competitive firm, marginal revenue is equal to the price of the commodity, and hence marginal revenue product of labor in this case is equal to the value of marginal product of labor VMPL. As long as the VMPL is greater than the wage rate, the firm will earn more profit by hiring one more unit of labor, and if at any level of labor employment VMPL is less than the wage rate, the firm can increase her profit by reducing a unit of labor employed. Given the assumption of the law of diminishing marginal product, the fact that the firm always produce at W is equal to VMPL implies that the demand curve for labor is downward sloping. To explain why it is so, let us assume at some wage rate W1, demand for labor is L1. Now suppose the wage rate increases to W2. To maintain the wage VMPL equality, VMPL should also increase. The price of commodity remaining constant. This is possible only if MPL increases, which in turn implies that less labor should be employed, owing to the diminishing marginal productivity of labor. Hence, at higher wage, less labor is demanded, thereby leading to a downward sloping demand. Downward sloping demand. Labor in hour or wage or SL. Curve. To arrive at the market demand curve from individual firms demand curve, we simply add up the demand for labor by individual firms at different wages, and since each firm demands less labor as wage increases, the market demand curve is also downward sloping. Wage is determined at the point where the labor demand and supply curves intersect. Having explored the demand side, we now turn to the supply side. As already mentioned, it is the households which determines how much labor to supply at a given wage rate. Their supply decision is essentially a choice between income and leisure. On the one hand, individuals enjoy leisure and find work irksome, and on the other, they value income for which they must work. So there is a trade-off between enjoying leisure and spending more hours for work. To derive the labor supply curve for a single individual, let us assume at some wage rate W1, the individual supplies L1 units of labor. Now, suppose the wage rise of W2. This increase in wage rate will have two effects. First, due to the increase in wage rate, the opportunity cost of leisure increases, which makes leisure costlier. Therefore, the individual will also to enjoy less leisure. As a result, they will work for longer hours. Second, because of the increase in wage rate of W2, the purchasing power of the individual increases. So she would want to spend more on leisure activities. The final effect of the increase in wage rate will depend on which of the two effects predominates. At low wage rates, the first effect dominates the second, and so the individual will be willing to supply more labor with an increase in wage rate. But at high wage rates, the second effect dominates the first, and the individual will be willing to supply less labor for every increase in wage rate. Thus, we get a backward bending individual labor supply curve, which shows that up to a certain wage rate, for every increase in wage rate, there is an increased supply of labor. Beyond this wage rate, for every increase in wage rate. Labor supply will decrease. Nevertheless, the market supply curve of labor, which we obtain by aggregating individual supply at different wages, will be upward sloping because though at higher wages, some individuals may be willing to work less. Many more individuals will be attracted to supply more labor. With an upward sloping supply curve and downward sloping demand curve, the equilibrium wage rates is determined at the point where these two curves intersect. In other words, where the labor that the households wish to supply is equal to the labor that the firms wish to hire. This is shown in the diagram. Shifts in demand and supply ये करेंगे अब कल.